Hello. In this video, we're going to look at examples of the three appeals of persuasion, were first laid out by the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. So Aristotle's three appeals of persuasion are components of writing that, when used effectively and evenly, can be very helpful in connecting to an audience and getting them to come along to your point of view, to see things the way that you see them, to basically agree with the argument that you are trying to make. And we'll soon be making a distinction between persuasive writing and argumentative writing. There's a lot in common between the two, but if we're talking about strict academic argument, there's a little bit of a difference between strictly persuasive writing. And we'll be exploring those differences very soon. But today, I just want to identify these three appeals of persuasion and texts that we've read so far over the course of the semester. So in your current weekly folder, you will find a handout that is basically a chart breaking down these three different appeals, and there's some graphics and a little list for each one, kind of showing different types of each of the appeals. So you might want to pause at each point in this video where we go over the different appeals, and just take a minute to look at that chart and consider it more fully beyond the examples we're looking at in this video. So the first appeal I want to look at is called pathos. And pathos basically means an appeal to emotion. It's a way of connecting to readers on an emotional level, appealing to their emotions, stirring up the feelings of the reader, the audience, getting them to feel happy, sad, afraid. Fear is a huge target of pathos and persuasion, and you'll see that a lot in politics. And I would say that of the texts we've read so far this semester, pathos has been by far the dominant characterizing feature of the writing. Now that's going to change. We'll be seeing a lot more logos soon. And logos has definitely been at the bottom of the hierarchy so far. But a lot of that is to do with the kind of reading, the kind of text that we've been looking at. We've been looking at kind of more personal narratives. We haven't really started to get into argument yet. But we are shifting gears, and as we start to read more argumentative writing, you would definitely see logos come to the fore, and pathos will become a little bit more discreet, a little bit more subtle. And that's something to keep in mind as we start to make a distinction between persuasive and argumentative writing. Whichever one you're doing, these three components should be active. However, when we get to argumentative writing, something like pathos, you want to be more subtle about. And we'll talk about different ways of being subtle with connecting to readers on an emotional level in academic writing. But just keep that in mind. That's something we're going to be discussing. And that's an important thing of how overt you want to be in your use of these three different appeals. So again, starting with pathos, the appeal to emotion, connecting to readers on an emotional level. And I chose as the example for this passage from Elizabeth Alexander's The Trayvon Generation. And it's when she's talking about her sons. And she says, I believed I could keep my sons alive by loving them, believed in the magical powers of complete adoration and a love ethic that would permeate their lives. My love was armor when they were small. My love was armor when their father died of a heart attack when they were 12 and 13. They think black men only die when they get shot, my older son said in the aftermath. My love was armor when that same year our community's block watch sent emails warning residents about two black kids on bikes and praising neighbors who had called the police on them. My love for my children said move. My love said follow your sons. When they ran into the dark streets of New York to join protesters after Eric Gardner's killer was acquitted. When my sons were in high school and pictures of Philando Castile were on the front page of the Times, I wanted to burn all the newspapers so they would not see the gun coming in the window, the blood on Castillo's t-shirt, the terror in his partner's face, and the eyes of his witnessing baby girl. But I was too late generationally, because they were not looking at the newspaper. They were looking at their phones, where the image was a house of mirrors straight to hell. All right, so we have kind of a swirl of emotions in this particular passage. It starts with love, um, which ideally would produce some kind of empathy in the reader, um, getting the reader to relate to her sense of familial love. We get a little bit of fear by juxtaposing this love against these kind of horrible images of violence, right? And it's pretty purely emotional. We have these conflicting emotions, but there's not a lot of explanation here. It's kind of just presenting these emotions, presenting some images that should prompt an emotional response in the reader. But there's not much in terms of logic or rationality. It's just a presentation of emotions. And there's not much about the author in here, other than this distillation of emotions that the author is feeling, and that ideally the reader can somehow relate to, even if they've never dealt directly with this kind of violence that's being depicted. They should be able to relate to a sense of familial love, ideally, and come to an understanding of the implications of that love being challenged by outside violence, by that familial bond being tested by racial prejudice and hatred, and the kind of tensions that arise when someone has to choose. We let the love win out over the fear, right? She kind of has to learn to love and trust her sons enough to sort of let them go out into the world and be men, really, and overcome that fear. Okay, the next one is ethos, which basically means establishing credibility and trust. It's a way of getting your audience, your readers, to trust you, to believe that you are a credible speaker, a credible writer. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. One way is to basically just list your credentials, your experience, to describe your experience, and a field related to the topic that you're talking about. You might also call upon reliable references. This is something you'll see in a lot of advertising, right? All of these components you'll see very overtly in advertising. But in terms of ethos, it might be a celebrity endorsement, a doctor's endorsement, something like that, where where an advertisement is presenting a kind of bona fide professional to promote the product that's being sold. But for our example here, I chose a passage from Joan Didion's The White Album. So she's introducing the period that she's going to be discussing throughout the essay, the kind of end of the 60s period. And she says, I suppose this period began around 1966 and continued until 1971. During those 5 years, I appeared, on the face of it, a competent enough member of some community or another, a signer of contracts and air travel cards, a citizen. I wrote a couple of times a month for one magazine or another, published 2 books, worked on several motion pictures, participated in the paranoia of time and the raising of a small child, and in the entertainment of large numbers of people passing through my house, made gingham curtains for spare bedrooms, remembered to ask agents if any reduction of points would be pari passu with the financing studio, put lentils to soak on Saturday night for lentil soup on Sunday, made quarterly FICA payments, and renewed my driver's license on time. missing on the written examination only the question about the financial responsibility of California drivers. It was a time of my life when I was frequently named. I was named godmother to children. I was named lecturer and panelist, colloquist and conferee. I was even named in 1968 a Los Angeles Times Woman of the Year, along with Mrs. Ronald Reagan, the Olympic swimmer, Debbie Meyer, and 10 other California women who seemed to keep in touch and do good works. I did no good works, but I tried to keep in touch. I was responsible. I recognized my name when I saw it. Once in a while, I even answered letters addressed to me, not exactly upon receipt, but eventually, particularly if the letters had come from strangers. During my absence from the country these past 18 months, such replies would begin. So this is kind of an interesting instance of Ethos where she's going through and she's establishing her professional credentials as a journalist, right? But she's also establishing her credentials as just kind of a participant in everyday life because she's discussing alongside her journalistic professional experiences during this time. And she's also just kind of talking about routine, regular stuff that anybody could relate to. So she's not just saying that I'm qualified to be writing about kind of anything, but also that, I was participating in this period that I'm talking about. I was participating in a journalistic level, and I have the credentials to prove it. Basically, uh, the range of experience to prove it, and you should trust what I'm writing. But I've also, done very routine things. I was getting my driver's license renewed, right? So she's taking part in the day to day, and she's setting up this, or what she seems to be trying to do is painting this brief portrait of herself as somebody who can be trusted as a commentator on the Times because of what she has done professionally, but also because of what she's done just as a regular woman living in California at the end of the 60s and participating in these routine events. So it's a really interesting example because she's not just trying to establish her professional credentials, but also her credentials as just a regular person, regular everyday person. But in either department, the purpose is the same. She's working to establish trust of the reader in herself. Okay, and finally, the third appeal is called logos, and that is basically where logic comes in. That's the appeal to logic and rationality. So this is, you start to see this with statistics, kind of argument building, statements that are sort of constructed around if this then that kind of thing. Bringing in sources, so like I said, it's kind of overlaps with ethos depending on the type of references you're bringing in, but using citing certain sources to help build an argument. This is where we start to really get into explanation, to proving the validity of something through statistics, through expositions on cause and effect, looking for proofs, looking for evidence. These are all things that relate to logic and rationality and hard proof. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, like I said, in the readings that we're sort of segueing into now, in a lot of different ways. But from what we've read so far, I found this to be the hardest to kind of identify and pull out a really solid passage. Because, like I said, most of what we've read so far has kind of relied on pathos above all else, and that's really been at the forefront. But that's going to start to change. But I did find a nice little passage in Kathy Park Hong's "The Slur I Never Expected to Hear in 2020," in which she brings in some statistics to support her point of view. She says the hate hasn't abated since Americans have been ordered to stay indoors. the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council said the reporting site was still receiving about 80 incidents a day, and there have been 1,600 since March 19th. Because of the shelter-in-place rules, working class Asians who are employed in essential businesses like grocers are not only at high risk of being exposed to the virus, but face the brunt of anti-Asian harassment. So you can see she's bringing in numbers here. She's providing an explanation, a supporting explanation for her representation of prejudice and violence against the Asian American community, right? Kind of proving in some small degree that it's not that she's not just making it up, that this is grounded in reality. There's concrete evidence to show that what she's saying is true. And she provides in this essay, she provides a lot of visual, visceral imagery ripped from the headlines type stuff. But here she's just showing sheer numbers, kind of in the abstract. It's just kind of a purely rational statement. All right, so we'll be talking a lot more about these three appeals and how they might be used differently in argumentative writing versus persuasive writing. But that is soon to come. For now, again, I just wanted to take an introductory glance at how these three appeals have been used in some of the texts that we've read so far. And we will be seeing them used a lot more, and we will be identifying how they're used a lot more in days and weeks to come. For now, have a lovely evening.